What is up, guys? Today I'd love to address probably the most common question that you guys ask me: how to deal with the Italian game or the fried liver attack. Now, in this position, after your opponent just played bishop c4, possibly targeting this pawn f7, of course you have a wide range of options. You could go into main lines such as knight to f6 or bishop to c5, but they're heavily theoretical. You really need to know a lot, and you can easily get into your opponent's home prep. Besides that, there is a really cool Rousseau Gambit, which is dear to my heart, and it's very interesting and tricky chess opening, which I recommended in my other videos, but as a grandmaster I always feel a little bit guilty when I recommend something that is objectively unsound and can be refuted potentially by your opponent. Therefore, I wanted to give you something that is simple, where you don't have to memorize a ton of stuff, but also you've got a clear attacking plan that you can follow. Alright, and that's what I found for this video, so I'm quite excited to share it with you. To start off, you play pawn h6. This shuts down all sorts of knight g5 fried liver attempts once and for all. Therefore, you don't have to worry about this. Now, in this position, the most played move, as well as the most aggressive move by white, is d4, trying to strike in the center. Then, you pretend like you guard this pawn by playing pawn d6. Your opponent will happily take this pawn on e5, expecting you to recapture. But you are not going to do that. We're playing a gambit. We want to trick our opponent. You do not want to capture right here, because then queen takes d8 indeed puts you in trouble. You have to either drop your knight back and lose this pawn in the middle of the board, or you have to move your king to the middle of the board and again lose this pawn on f7. That's what your opponent is hoping for, but we're not going to let him that easy life. Instead, once he captures your pawn on e5, you don't recapture, but you go bishop g4, pinning the knight, putting pressure to the central pawn. At this point, you are ready to recapture, and your opponents will usually take here on d6. Now you bring your bishop out into play, and you sacrificed one pawn, but you turn the table. Now you are the one with development advantage, you're the one attacking, and your opponent will have a really hard time figuring out the right defense. I mean, spoiler, the right defense is so tricky that literally nobody besides Kramnik's homies will find it. Now, at this point, your opponents will usually play some development move, such as castling kingside, and then you play queen e7, which is a part of your plan. That possibly puts pressure on this pawn in the middle of the board, but even more importantly, you are getting ready to castle queenside, which you are going to do on the next move. Because by doing so, you castle, which is nice, but you also simultaneously put your rook to this open file, and it x-rays their queen, which already sets the stage for the very first trap in this opening, and lots of your opponents will fall for this first trap. If your opponent plays any casual move, bishop e3 or whatever, you've got this bishop takes h2, checking their king, and grabbing their queen on the next move. That wins the game on the spot. Moreover, let me take this move back. Even if your opponent plays pawn h3, which is actually quite common for white, trying to get rid of this annoying pin, you can still counter-strike with the same bishop take to h2. In this case, you don't capture a pawn, but nevertheless, fundamentally the idea is the same. You're checking his king, and you grab the queen on the next move. They probably will capture by the king. If they try doing that by the knight, then you can actually make use of that pin and grab the queen by your bishop. Therefore, it's bad for white. If they capture with the king, then you grab the queen, gaining material advantage. But that's not all, because after this, you can now take on f3, forcing them to split up their pawns and totally weaken their king. And on top of this, you've got a really strong follow-up move, queen c5, which is a double attack to the bishop and this pawn on f2, and from there you attack their queen, which turns it into a totally winning position for black. Actually, what I love about this variation is that we're right now into the most played main line of this gambit. And my bold promise here is that if you can get to this point, you're very likely to win the game within the couple next moves, because you've got so strong pressure across all these diagonals and files that is extremely difficult for your opponent to figure out the right defense. Usually they'll collapse and overlook one of your threats. The most played move by white here is actually knight to d5, which is yet another mistake. It feels like an active move because they hit your queen, but in reality, that just blunders this pawn on e4. And from here, your queen becomes really active. It actually hits this bishop on c4, and some of your opponents will blunder that. But even if they realize that and drop the bishop back, then you can just play knight f6, the very simple move. And again, you still have this extremely strong pressure all around. Usually they'll trade here on f6. We don't worry about these weak pawns, that doesn't really matter. Again, you have so much going on here for you that really we don't care about our double pawns. Bishop takes h2 threat, still real. Bishop takes f3, hitting their queen is also very annoying for them. If they try something like queen e1, you've got a number of ways to handle this. The most spectacular one is queen takes f3. Your position is so strong that you can even sacrifice your queen just for a minor piece. And although white is now up a queen and it is their turn, they realize your threat, rook g8, checkmate on the next move, they can't do anything about that. Even if they play bishop takes f7 trying to control this square, you'll be gentle enough to let them grab more material, but after this, that is still gonna be a checkmate. Finally, if your opponent is advanced and they realize that there is this discovered attack threat, they might wish to move the queen off the d-file. However, they still need to guard this knight on f3, because otherwise you're gonna take it and ruin their castling. Therefore, queen e2 seems to be the way. But the fun part is, yes, they remove their queen from the danger across the d-file, however, they get right into the other tactical trick. This time you can play knight to d4 and make use of the pin. Their knight can't move because that would drop the queen. But if they don't move the knight, then they have to face this threat, and actually a whole lot of threats delivered by your knight as well as your bishop. And as you can see, it's really tough for white. Here white has to find the only move not to lose the game straight away. Because if they move their queen anywhere to the d-file, they're going to once again suffer this x-ray. And you're going to trade on f3, and then play bishop takes h2, and win their queen. That is the standard tactical motif that we talked about previously. So the only move which allows them not to lose the game straightforwardly is queen to e3, which they have to find. And now there's a little bit of an issue. Initially you can trade on f3, that's pretty cool, we open up their king. And now, at first it feels like you could take this pawn on c2, forking their queen and rook, and it feels like you're winning the game. However, it's not the case. If you take knight takes c2, there is this queen takes a7, and all of a sudden they have pretty strong counterattack. That's why you have to slow down at this point and make a prophylactic move king b8, just to guard this pawn so that there is no queen takes a7 down the line. After this, knight takes c2 threat is real, forking the queen and rook, and white needs to do something about that. They still can't take your knight, and I guess you already know why, because we've got the same solution, bishop takes h2 check, followed by rook takes d4, grabbing the queen, again very common for this whole gambit. But if not, they have to guard this pawn on c2. And if they do that, somehow, you just keep attacking on the king side. Or knight to d5, I think it's the most played move. They're trying to counter, but in fact it fails, because you're just going forward, threatening queen takes h2 checkmate, and you can see that you have really so many threats. Knight takes c2 is still a threat. In one game, they still tried to counter with e5, but you have one more trick, you have really plenty of them in this gambit, which is bishop takes e5. Feels like a bishop sacrifice, but on the next move it was knight to f3 with a royal fork, and black won the game. So far we talked about the most played line which you are probably going to face most frequently. However, I understand that there are always some people who write in comments, my opponents never play like that. So let's talk about different what-ifs, therefore you'll be prepared whatever your opponent tries. Now, at this point, one of the questions you may have is, it feels too good to be true. Like, white can't just go down that easily, they didn't play any wrong moves. Well, the fun part about this is that the correct move that Stockfish recommends in this position is bishop b5, which is extremely counterintuitive, given the fact that white has just developed their bishop to c4, but now somehow they changed their mind and moved one square forward instead of casting or developing their pieces. Therefore, the bishop b5 move, you are not going to really face unless you're playing a cheater. Now, what else can they try? If they develop their pieces in any other way, not castle but any other moves, you still follow your plan, that doesn't matter. If they play h3, that doesn't change the situation, you drop the bishop back, and after this you still play same moves, queen e7, and you castle. Another question is, what if they don't accept your gambit? So they initially capture this pawn on e5, but after this they chicken out and they don't take here on d6. Well, then there is no problem, because you'll just get your pawn back. If they, let's say, castle, you can then get this pawn back. But now notice the difference. Previously, after white captured right here on d8, you had to move either your king or knight, and both of those moves are undesirable. However, after you developed your bishop from c8, and it doesn't block the 8th rank anymore, you can now bring your rook into play, and that's just great. Now you control an open file, you threaten bishop takes f3, life's good, now it's white who's fighting for equality. Another tempting move by white would be not to capture here on e5, but to play d5. And although it forces your knight to go once again, but on the other hand, it also blocks out this bishop from c4, making it a tall pawn, totally dull. And after this, generally speaking, the position becomes closed. White does not have any attacking options, therefore they'll play something like castle, you develop a knight and hit this pawn, they'll guard it somehow, and after this you just complete your development. You want to develop this bishop, you can't do it along this diagonal, it's barricaded, but you can go g6, and then on the next move, bishop g7, castle, and the position objectively is approximately equal. But good thing about those types of positions is that your opponents usually are not great positional players, and when there are no tactical ideas or straightforward attacking attempts, they don't know what to do, and you can outplay them easily. Besides that, some of your opponents will not play the most ambitious move, pawn to d4, and instead they will just develop casually, somehow play d3, knight c3, castle, something like this. After this, there is no problem, you don't worry about knight g5 anymore, as you took this square away, therefore they'll just have to play some simple chess, and then you play bishop c5, d6, and you end up with a normal, approximately equal position. And again, your opponents usually are bad at planning and those kind of things. Therefore, if they don't have straightforward attacking options, they start to, play inferior moves, and you can outplay them later. By the way, most chess players just play blitz games, solve tactical puzzles, and watch random videos online, which is nice, but unfortunately, usually they can't progress despite playing chess for years. So if you want to be ahead of the crowd, I've put together a dedicated bundle called Boost Your Elo to 2000, which I designed mainly for adult amateurs who don't have that much time to allocate for chess, but wish to follow a proven roadmap for improvement. And there you can find everything that you need to get to that level of 2000 and make your game a lot more consistent with fewer errors and have that clear, consistent improvement. If you're interested, you can get it by clicking the link below the video in the description. Either way, let me know if you have any questions, and have a great rest of the day.